Hey everyone, this is a video for week 7 or 8. It's about Federalist Paper 47 and 51. I'm going to read from a script that I'm writing for an upcoming project, so it won't be my normal just sort of off-the-cuff discussion, and I'll move through it as quickly as possible. So here goes. In the following videos, we're going to discuss the Federalist Papers 47 and 51. 47 explains why we should keep the branches of government separate, while 51 explains how we might accomplish that. Underlying both essays is a concern for the concentration of power and the inevitable corruption that derives from that concentration. But first, let's put the Federalist Papers into some context. At the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, the American founders created a government based upon the Articles of Confederation, not the Constitution that we have today, mind you. This system failed because the individual states had too much power. There was no mechanism that could force them into uniform behavior. States could print their own money, make unilateral deals with other states, even other countries. They could ignore paying debts, and generally act with near complete independence. So, once it became obvious that this was not sustainable, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay set out to write a series of essays, 85 in total, designed to convince the American people that a stronger national government was necessary to create stable and unified country, and that it could be designed in a way that would protect individual liberty. Okay, so in Fed 47, we're given an explanation as to why the executive, legislative, and judicial branches ought to be kept separate in the first place. And it's actually pretty straightforward. In the paper itself, he talks about a guy from Britain called Montesquieu who does an analysis of political structures. But here's the nuts and bolts of it, right? These are the three natural functions of any structure of power: legislative, executive, and judicial. And they ought to be kept separate so that there is not a conflict of interest when writing the laws, enforcing the laws, and interpreting the laws. Here's a more concrete example. A parent-child relationship is tyrannical by nature. A parent makes the rules, decides whether the children have broken the rules, and then enforces the rules, usually by means of some punishment. Sometimes parents are inconsistent in the execution of this responsibility. It is, after all, a tough job to have all of that power and to exercise it with moderation. Generally, parents love their children and don't want to see them suffer. So, they will exercise their power in a way that benefits the child, in the long run, if not the short run. However, no such affectionate relationship is guaranteed between rulers and citizens. So the point is that you should not want your relationship to your government to reflect the relationship between a parent and a child. When executive, legislative, and judicial powers rest in the hands of an individual or a small group, there is a very great likelihood of unjust treatment of the citizens, also known as tyranny. Okay, so in the last video, we talked about why we should separate the branches of government. Federalist 51 offers suggestions on how we might accomplish that. Initially, they provide us with a few examples of how we can balance the branches against one another. Then they will offer a second layer of protection, specifically the federal system and pluralism, which is touched on back in Federalist Paper 10. Remember that all of this is geared toward the goals of stable government and personal liberty. Okay, first principle, there are two. The first principle is that the three branches should be designed to keep one another in check. To this end, each branch should have a will of its own, right? The president, the legislature, and the judiciary, and they're all pushing against each other, right, trying to maintain their own power. So the office of president commands great respect, but a president cannot and should not tell Supreme Court justices or legislators how to do their jobs. Similarly, the Congress is vested with great power, but the President and the Supreme Court justices must be able to make decisions based upon their own judgments without interference. Remember, each branch has a different function and thus different responsibilities. Another principle is that the various branches should not rely on one another for their respective appointments. This has to do with how they're chosen, how they're elected. Consider how difficult it is to stand up to the person who gave you your job and has the power to fire you from your job, right? So altering the way that branches are elected helps to further insulate them from one another. Now, just real quick here. According to the Constitution, the legislature is the most powerful branch, in addition to being the largest, right? It's given the most power. It also is the closest to the people, since the members of Congress are elected by popular vote. The president is one person with a lot of power and a bureaucracy supporting the office. But unlike the legislature, the president is a step removed from the popular vote by the Electoral College. This is by design. The Supreme Court is the weakest branch since its constitutional powers are the most limited. Also, the Supreme Court is the furthest removed from the voting public since the justices are nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. It is this imbalance of power, coupled with the different functions, that 51 seeks to address. All right, hopefully this all makes sense. So, what mechanisms can be put into place to account for these imbalances? 51 gives us 3 examples. The first example is the nomination of justices to the Supreme Court. Now, you might think that a popular vote would be the most legitimate way to choose a Supreme Court justice. But the authors suggest that the unique skills needed for a Supreme Court justice requires a different method of choosing. Consider how difficult it would be for the voting republic, every average individual, to sort through each judge's body of constitutional analysis. That means all of their legal writing. Most voters are simply not equipped to perform this task, lacking both time and the ability to just analyze the material. Most voters are not equipped to do this, right? So, the president nominates, the Senate confirms, and then the position is for life. Once confirmed, the Supreme Court justice is beholden to no one. This prevents other branches and public sentiment, as it swings wildly, from having undue influence over court decisions. Right, we want the Supreme Court to be the most insulated, least ideological, least radical, right? We don't want them playing partisan politics. And having their positions be for life protects them a little bit from that. Okay, second example is the challenge of controlling the most powerful branch, the legislature. They choose to separate the legislature into the House of Representatives and the Senate, right? So we have one big legislature split in half with 2 different parts. The Congress, the ones we elect directly, being the most powerful. They have different constitutional responsibilities and were previously elected by different means and at different times. While members of Congress have always been elected by popular vote, it was the senators that were initially elected by state legislatures. This was later changed by constitutional amendment, and now all legislators, members of Congress, and senators are elected by popular vote right within their respective states. It's true that by changing the election of senators to a popular vote, we have contradicted or undermined the original intent of the founders, but whether that's good or bad is outside the scope of our video. The third example is concerned with how the weaker branch, the presidency, can stand up to the stronger branch, the legislature. This is how we get the presidential veto. The veto allows the president to single-handedly halt the passage of a bill or of any other congressional action. Well, some. But with a 2/3 majority of both houses, the Senate and the Congress, a bill can be passed, even if the president is against it. In this way, the weaker branch, the president, has the power to push back against the stronger branch. Hopefully you can see how these 3 examples, by no means exhaustive, offer some mechanisms for how to balance the power of these different branches against one another, right? We take the Supreme Court and we insulate them and give them some protection because they're the weakest. We take the most powerful, the legislature, and we split it apart, right, to mitigate that power. And then we give the president the veto power, right, to give them a little more oomph against the stronger branch, the legislature. Okay. Now that we have this strong central government with 3 relatively independent branches of power, how can we ensure the preservation of individual liberty? The answer is, or at least one of the answers is, the federal system. Right, so just as we have 3 branches of government on the national level, right, the federal government, so we also now have 3 branches of government in each state. At the national level, you have the president, the legislature, and the Supreme Court. At each state level, we have a governor, a state legislature, and a state Supreme Court, a completely separate, insulated government in each state. States are not allowed to act contrary to the national government, but within their borders, they do have a large amount of autonomy or independence. This is yet another way of balancing power. In this situation, we have moved beyond balancing branch against branch, and now we are balancing national government against state governments all across. Again, the idea is to balance power against power to keep them out of our personal lives, right, to preserve individual freedoms. The final piece to this puzzle is the concept of pluralism, and this one, in my estimation, is one of the weakest arguments, but it's still in the paper, so we're going to talk about it. The Federalists believe, and I think rightly so, that a country with many different groups and perspectives is actually more stable. What, you say? Well, more stable because it would be unlikely that a single group could come together to form a majority and terrorize or to bring injustice upon the masses. The larger the country and the greater the population, the less likely it is that a combination of interests would come together to impose a majority will on the people and the rest of society. It is for this reason the founders feared a pure democracy, right? In a pure democracy, 51% makes all of the rules, and the 49% are in trouble because they have no recourse against unjust behavior because the 51% decides what is just and unjust. Whereas in our system, we have a constitution that creates those rules regardless of who's in power. So, this has been a review of Federalist 47 and 51, and that final piece about pluralism really is kind of a throwback to Fed 10. Hopefully this is helpful and not too painfully long. Good luck.